Gassing out in Jiu-Jitsu is one of the things that sucks the most, whether that be in a fight or just in regular training. Welcome back to The Path of Milo. I'm Morten Winter, and today we're going to be talking about cardio for Jiu-Jitsu. So it's very unavoidable that you're going to be losing whenever you practice Jiu-Jitsu. We all know that you're going to be tapped out, and some days you have a lot of matches or rounds where you're going to be the one tapping other people out, and other times it's going to be the other way around, right? But one of the things that is most humiliating is when you're forced to tap out because you're gassing out. So your conditioning is not on par with what you need for the training session or in this match, and you end up quitting because you simply can't stand the exhaustion that you're experiencing in the moment. And obviously, if you're very technically sound, you are going to be able to maybe find positions where you can rest a little bit and then kind of recover. But it depends on the level of your opponent as well, right? So it sucks to be the person that has to tap out because of exhaustion. And it's equally frustrating to be able to get into a position where you're able to dominate your training partner or your opponent, and then you're gassing out, so you can't actually finish. You can't actually do anything from there except hold on. So there are also a few things that are like less satisfying in Jiu-Jitsu than actually tapping someone out because of pure pressure and just making them fatigued so they can't continue the match. So it's very nice to be the person that has more cardio than the other way around, obviously. So we talk a lot about strength, but cardio is obviously also important. And what also happens when your cardio is poor, like your fitness levels are poor, is that your recovery is going to suffer. So whenever you're training cardio, you're also training your mitochondria. So mitochondria are these little, we call them power plants within the cells. So they're the ones that are responsible for actually creating the energy that you're using during most of the time when you're physically active. So at rest, you're mainly burning fat and a little bit of carbohydrate in these mitochondria. And then as your activity levels or your intensities increase, you kind of switch to more kind of carbohydrate based, but it's still going to be the mitochondria that are driving most of the energy production. Obviously, you have other energy systems when you go above these levels of intensity, so that you can kind of sustain higher intensities for a certain amount of time. But most of our energy comes from energy production in the mitochondria. And whenever we're doing cardio training and we're actually improving the cardiorespiratory capacity, we also actually get more mitochondria in the muscle cell. So we get better at producing this energy in the cells. A few other things also happen whenever you train the respiratory system. You get more capillaries, which are like tiny blood vessels that supply the muscles with blood. So if you're only doing strength training, you don't get the same kind of level of increase in the mitochondria. So your ability to actually deliver blood, oxygen, and nutrients to the cells kind of decrease if you're not actually taking care of your cardiorespiratory training. And you also get less levels of myoglobin, which is the actual transporter within the cells that's going to take the oxygen from your bloodstream and then deliver it into the mitochondria. So these are kind of the physiological reasons why it might make sense to spend a little bit of time also thinking about cardio training. Because all of these things help you recover faster. So it helps you to recover between rounds, but it also helps you to recover day to day. So if you have a hard training session on the mat, then having better cardiorespiratory fitness will also make you able to recover faster for either another session during the day or the next session the next day. So we're going to be looking at what you can actually do to improve these and how you might want to structure it in your training. And the thing about jiu-jitsu is that when you are first starting out, just attending class is probably going to be enough cardio for you to actually just improve. So if you haven't trained before, or even if you're training other sports, then going to jiu-jitsu because you're not technically as good yet, everything's going to be hard, because a lot of the things that we do in training are quite specific. So we talk about what's called the set principle, so specific adaptation to impose demands. And you might have been doing CrossFit, you might have been doing endurance racing or high rocks, or you might have been doing yoga or Pilates, doesn't really matter. But as soon as you go to jiu-jitsu, it's a different beast than whatever it is that you've been doing before. So a lot of the physical attributes that we train needs to be trained also in the context of jiu-jitsu, because you're wrestling on another human being and they're trying to prevent you from doing everything that you're wanting to do, and vice versa. So the cardio in this case is also going to be specific to jiu-jitsu. But the problem is that the better you get, the more technical you get, the better you're able to predict what the other person's doing and prevent them from doing this. So you're going to be faster at kind of reacting to whatever's going on. And that means that you're actually going to be using less energy in training, which also means that the benefits that you got before, you don't get anymore. So the actual cardiorespiratory adaptation to jiu-jitsu becomes less over time as you kind of progress in technical ability. So if you want to be able to kind of keep that level up, it might be a good idea to actually do some training on the side that improves your cardiorespiratory fitness for jiu-jitsu. And you can do this in different ways, because if you are getting better and you don't need the fitness anymore because everything's easier, this holds true when you're training with someone that's a lower level than you. So you might be a purple belt, you might be a brown belt, you might be a black belt, you might also be a blue belt, or you might be someone who's just starting out. But say you're a purple belt, then you might find that the matches that you're doing or the sparring rounds that you're doing during class becomes easier when you're training with, like the 40-year-old dad of two who trains twice a week and is mainly doing it to stay in shape. But what happens when you go up against the brown belt or the black belt, or even the 20-year-old competitive blue belt who just seems to have endless cardio? Then you need something extra, right? And you kind of have different choices when you want to add some cardio on top of your jiu-jitsu. So one thing would be to do more jiu-jitsu specific stuff. So this could be doing like more stand-up stuff. It could be doing more kind of specific training where you're pushing it. Say you're doing specific guard passing drills, and then the coach will have you imagine that there's only, say, 30 seconds left in the match. So you want to push it because you want to score the point. You want to end up in a dominant position, or you want to get that finish. So this would be a way to increase the demand. So you can't just kind of camp out and relax. You always have to do something. So the setup might be that you're behind on points and you need to score points before the time runs out. You might have 1 minute, you might have 2 minutes, but this would be a way to create a scenario that pushes you to actually spend more energy than you normally would if you were just in a dominant position. And then you're going to be doing this for a set duration of time. So it might be like 5 minutes, it might be 4 minutes, it might be 3 minutes, even if the mindset is you have 1 minute left. So if you succeed, you're just going to have to go again. And then you count how many times did I actually pass this opponent, or how many times did I get out of the position. Because then you're going to increase the specific demands of the sport with the movements of the sport, with the resisting opponent. So for those of you who only want to train on the mat, this might be a good way to approach this. You could also just do more sparring. But the thing about this is it tends to tap into your recovery ability. So if you're just increasing sparring, then you're also going to increase fatigue, and like you might increase, like joint pain and some of the things that you might also be dealing with if you're doing a lot of jiu-jitsu. So it might be nice to have something that's more structured and more predictable outside of jiu-jitsu, so that you can perform better whenever you go to training. So one of the things that's kind of popular is to throw in a few CrossFit sessions during the week. And a lot of people kind of like to do this because the demands of CrossFit or functional fitness somehow seems to feel like you're in a jiu-jitsu match. Because your weight bearing, oftentimes, like you'll be working with a barbell or dumbbells, you'll have some body weight movements. So all the weight bearing stuff kind of simulates being on the bottom or doing stand up, where you have to throw around external load. And a lot of the gymnastic stuff more kind of resembles positions where you're on top and you have to work obviously against some kind of resistance, but it's mostly your own body that you're moving. But you have to move it in a certain way to avoid the resistance that your opponent is giving you. So I get why a lot of people like to go to CrossFit and use this as a supplementary training. The thing about that is, we'll get back to it, but you need to be careful about what types of workouts you're doing if you don't want them to tap too much into your recovery capacity. But we're going to get back to that. Another thing would be doing, like HIIT workouts, which is oftentimes some type of compound movement. It might be like a combined exercise. Say we're doing like burpees and then jumping, or it might be body weight stuff where you're doing jumping jacks or skiers or mountain climbers or stuff like this. Or you might be doing simple stuff with a kettlebell. It might be interval training. It might be involving some jumping, some like short sprints, change of direction, stuff like this. This could be a way to approach this as well. It's usually quite short in duration and interval based, and kind of predictable as well, which is nice in a lot of ways. Another way would be to say, okay, my main goal with the supplementary cardio training is just to increase my cardiorespiratory capacity. So I want to make sure my heart is getting a lot of work, and I want to make sure my lungs are really challenged. And then I'm going to go and do mainly ergometer training, which would be, like ski ergometer. It would be like rowing. It would be, sitting on a bike, or maybe what we call an assault bike or an airdyne. Stuff like this, that's very simple. It's very, you could say, monotonous. CrossFit would say it would be monostructural. But the cool thing about training in these ergometers, or even going for like a longer bike ride, is that the muscle work, or like the way the muscle is contracting, is only, or primarily anyway, concentric, which means the muscle damage that usually occurs whenever you're doing more eccentric loaded work which you would be doing a ton of in CrossFit as well, which is why a lot of people get quite sore from doing these type of workouts, is tapping a lot into your recovery capacity. So it sucks if you're doing it to get better at jiu-jitsu, but then you're actually too sore or fatigued whenever you go to class to be able to move and hit the movements and the techniques that you want to hit in training, because your body is too sore and too stiff. So you can't really train with the intensity on the mat that you want to. Where if you're choosing to do more of the ergometer training, then you're going to be less sore, but you're still going to be able to push your heart rate a lot. And I feel personally that I'm actually able to get a higher heart rate whenever I'm doing this type of training as compared to when I'm doing a CrossFit style workout. Now, it might be because I just suck at CrossFit, even though I've been doing it on and off for many years. But I feel like the way that CrossFit pushes me is more, it's obviously also the heart rate. And I feel like you can't get enough oxygen, but it's also a local fatigue. Oftentimes, there's a lot of ways to do CrossFit workouts, but a lot of times the workouts also involve a very localized fatigue in the muscles that you're working, because the load is more significant anyway than whenever you're doing ergometer training. So that's something to consider anyway. And a last one would be, not a last one, we can add other stuff on top of this, but another one would be your kind of baseline cardio training. So how do you move around or about in your daily life? I'm fortunate enough that I live in a city where biking is normal and it's something that we do. So I live in Copenhagen, and some people call it the biking capital of the world. And I spend a lot of time on the bike. And usually what I'll do is I'll speed up whenever I'm going somewhere. And then I get a break because I have to wait for the lights to turn green, and then I get to go again. So it becomes very interval based, but it's not extremely high intensity, but it's enough that my baseline cardio is actually going to be okay. So if you have that opportunity, or if you're walking a lot and you can walk at a pace where you're actually getting the heart rate up a little bit, then this could be a way to make sure anyway that your baseline cardio is high enough so you're not going to be fatigued just from doing a little bit of jiu-jitsu. But you still want to get those peaks if you want to actually improve your cardio long term. Another one that I personally love is doing sprint work. And the reason I love that is because it also helps you to develop overall athletic ability. But the trade-off is that sprint work also tends to tap into the recovery, at least for like hips, ankle joints, and knees, which is something that a lot of people in jiu-jitsu have inflammation in. Like, you might have old injuries, like you might have popped an ankle, popped a knee. If you've been doing jiu-jitsu for a long time, you might have a little bit of arthritis going on. So sprints might feel like they're deducting from your recovery capacity. So it's something that I would encourage you to throw into your training, but also something I would encourage you to step up progressively. So don't go out and do like a full sprint session if you haven't sprinted for 10 years. It's a very powerful tool, but it's also something that can destroy you. And then you're not able to train jiu-jitsu for like a few days, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, depending on how hard you go at it. So how much should you actually be doing? The thing about physical training or strength and conditioning training is that strength as a capacity takes a long time to achieve. Like, people that are strong have been working on their strength for a lot of years. So we usually say that strength takes like years to develop if you want to become like really strong. Because if we're just looking at the speed at which the different structures in the body adapt, then the nervous system adapts really fast, like within seconds or minutes. Just think about whenever you hit a new skill that you haven't been able to do before, then your brain, your nervous system understands how should I move the body, and then you're able to do it again. Where the cardiorespiratory system takes longer to adapt, so it's more kind of days, weeks, few months. Muscles takes around 8 weeks if you are starting out, and then like, okay, now my muscles have kind of adapted to this strength. So not 8 weeks like as a hard cutoff, but it takes weeks for the muscles to kind of adapt to the loading. Bones take a little bit longer. Think about if you fracture something, how long time does that take? It usually takes a few months. And then if we're going into ligaments, this will usually be 4 to 6, maybe 8 months. So if you sprain something, it's going to be longer time. The same with tendons. It's also kind of this range. And then if we're looking at cartilage, it's even longer. So cartilage damage, we usually say 1 to 2 years if it actually heals. So getting strong takes years. It also takes years to develop a good marathon runner, because then we're looking at, okay, where is the peak, like peak performance? But to increase cardio for someone who has a decent baseline to someone who's able to compete and not gas out, we usually say like 6 to 10 weeks, depending on the entry level, which is also the duration of most kind of training camps. For major competitions, you would go into a training camp a few months before, if you're lucky, if everything is turning out perfect. And then you're actually going to have enough time to build up the cardio, but you can't get really strong in 8 weeks. So how much should you do during the week just to kind of slowly increase your cardio over time? And I would say 1 to 2 times a week, dedicated training for cardio is enough for most people. Because you also need to factor in like what's your recovery capacity, how much time do you actually have on hand? Are you a professional athlete who can train twice a day, maybe 3 times a day? Or are you someone who has a full-time job, you have a family, you can only afford to train 3, maybe 4 times a week, and maybe you can throw in a few 20-minute sessions here and there? Then you need to figure out how much can I kind of get away with and still improve, or at least maintain a relatively high level of cardiorespiratory fitness. And for most people, if you're also doing jiu-jitsu and if you're also following a strength training program, like the one we have in Path of Milo, then a few times a week is sufficient to make sure that you're not going to be gassing out as easily anyway. So we're going to talk about protocols a little bit. How much time and what would you actually be doing? So if you're choosing to do, say, steady state cardio to build your base, so this could be walking at a high pace, it could be biking, could be going on one of these ergometers like rowing, ski erg, bike erg, the assault bike, but you're doing it steady state, then we would usually recommend that if you're doing, say, zone 2 cardio, which is at a level where you can still hold a conversation, so you can throw out longer sentences, but your heart rate is up. So you're not at rest and you're working, but you're working at a comfortable level where you could have a buddy on the side and you can actually have a conversation with them. Then I would say go for sessions that are like 30 to 40 minutes long, twice a week. And if you're more the type that wants to go a little bit higher intensity, you like the intensity, you want to make it more specific to the sport, which is kind of interval based. Most fights are like between 5 to 10 minutes, depending on your level, depending on, are you doing IBJJF rules, or are you competing in like Nogi local tournament, or is it like a setup where you have rounds? So it's like Craig Jones Invitational. It's usually going to be interval based. You're going to go in, you're going to have a fight. It's going to be full on. Then you're going to come out, you're going to rest, and then you're going to go back in again. One of the protocols that works very well is doing something like 4x4. So 4 rounds or 4 sets of 4 minutes at a relatively high intensity. So 80, 85, maybe 90% of your heart rate max, depending on how good you are at actually reaching these levels. And then you're going to have sufficient rest in between so that you can keep doing it for 4 sets. So usually we'll say 2 minutes. So it allows your body to kind of increase the heart rate, hold or take a break. The heart rate comes down, but it doesn't come down to baseline. It goes up, and then you increase it a little bit, or you just kind of stay at this level where you're oscillating between rest and then a peak, rest, peak, rest, peak. So this doesn't take up that much time. You could potentially go in, you could do it after a jiu-jitsu session if you're not fully fatigued. It doesn't cut into your recovery that much. You can recover from this relatively fast by just getting good carbohydrates, some protein, and then a good night's sleep. And then you would probably be able to do it the next day. You can't say the same about heavy deadlifts in strength training. Like, you can't recover from heavy deadlifts in 24 hours or 48 hours. It takes longer. So this is something that you can throw in during the week. You could even throw it in after a resistance training session. So say I'm doing something that's mostly upper body related. So in the Path of Milo program, we have, right now we have like a push day. So I'm doing like push presses, bench press, assisted work for upper body push power development. I could go in and then I could do a biking session after that, and it wouldn't cut into my adaptations for the upper body strength very much. If I make sure that I get a little bit of carbohydrate after the strength, maybe some protein, and then I go and hit the ergometer training. What I wouldn't recommend is doing a heavy strength session for the legs and then going on the bike afterwards, because you're actually going to shunt some of the adaptations for strength that you just put a lot of effort in. So if you choose to do it on the same day, I would either do it after a jiu-jitsu session. Before, you could also do it, then you're just going to go into jiu-jitsu a little bit fatigued. I would prefer to do it afterwards. Or I would do it so if I'm doing lower body work, then I would do upper body strength work. If I'm doing lower body strength work, I would do something that's more upper body dominant for the cardio. So it could be using the ski ergometer on a lower body day. Preferably, I would do it the other way around. So I would do strength for the upper body, and then I would do some kind of ergometer training that involves mostly the lower body, because these are the muscles that use up the most energy. So if I'm doing rowing, which also involves upper body, of course, but if I'm doing like rowing or like biking, it's going to be more my legs that are doing like the explosive type work. And that's going to use up a shit ton of energy. And my heart needs to pump enough oxygen and blood through the body to support those levels of activity. So it's going to place higher demands on my heart, actually, and my lungs. And it doesn't cut into the adaptations for the muscles that I just trained. If I choose to go with the CrossFit, Then what I would do is I would kind of avoid the random workouts. So just joining a CrossFit workout at your local gym, you have no control over what you're actually fatiguing. And you might end up, if it's poorly programmed or if it's just kind of one of these old school workouts, which are interesting to do for sure, but some of them tend to burn out one body part more than the other. And say you're doing something that's really hard on your grip, and then the next day you have a gi session, then it's gonna cut too much into your actual jiu-jitsu training. So what I would do is I would look at how can I program something that is relatively light load, higher reps, and is more kind of systemically fatiguing instead of localized to one particular muscle group. I would try to keep the duration relatively short, so preferably less than 10 minutes. So it's going to be high intensity for up to 10 minutes, and then I'm done. Because if I start to go into one of these workouts where it's like 40 minutes of high intensity because I'm shifting between exercises, then the recovery demands for that is going to be higher, and it's going to be similar to if you went to an open mat, for instance, and say you did, let's say like you did like 8 rounds, 6 or 8 rounds of 4 to 6 minutes. The fatigue that you get from that, if you're actually going in and it's equally matched, is pretty high. And if you hit the same intensity in your supplementary training, it's going to cut into your jiu-jitsu too much. So I would avoid that if I prioritize jiu-jitsu in this period. But if you're not prioritizing jiu-jitsu and you're just kind of doing this for overall health, then by all means, you could throw in one of these longer workouts, CrossFit style. The last one is the sprint intervals that I mentioned that I like because it develops overall athletic ability, and I think sprints are generally kind of undervalued, and it requires some technical ability. Like you need to learn how to sprint, especially if you haven't done it for years. You need to give your body time to adapt, especially your Achilles tendons and like your knees, your ankles. So these needs to be introduced and then slowly progressed over time. But you could start sprinting like shorter distances, throw in some change of direction. I personally like the format for conditioning anyway, of doing like 10 minutes and then it's like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. So it's called the Danish military speed test if you do it with a specific set of rules where you kind of, you're running, I think it's like 20 meters. And then on 10 meters, you have a marker. So your goal is to run as many rounds as possible. And then you can go and you can go and find the exact rules on YouTube. But you run as many rounds as possible every 30 seconds. And then if you hit more than halfway on the last one, it counts as half a rep. And then the goal is just to accumulate as much as possible in these 10 minutes. It's easy to score, and you can actually see if you're progressing over time. This would be one type of sprinting intervals. Another one would be doing, say, like 800-meter intervals, or 600, or 400, and 200. So the way I like to progress it with clients typically is we'll start by doing some longer intervals. Say we'll do like a few times of 3 kilometers. Then we're going to be doing 1500s. Then we're going to be doing 1000 meters. Then we're going to be doing 800, 600, 400, 200, 100 meters, and then finish up with 50-meter sprints. And then we're going to vary the volume of, progress the volume. So we're doing fewer sets of 1500 meters, obviously, than we are of 100-meter sprints. But this is a way to get some running in, get some intervals in, get your heart rate up, and actually also work on your overall athleticism outside of the mat. Yeah. So I hope this kind of clarifies the way I approach conditioning for jiu-jitsu anyway. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions for this. And please like and subscribe if you want to get more content like this.